Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another show. Today I have Stu Peters with me. Stu Peters is one of the most loud voices in the United States against the Israeli lobby. Has been speaking intensively in the past 2 years against the Israeli crimes to a level where he became on AIPAC's most wanted list nowadays with several accusations. Today, I'm going to delve into several subjects with Stu. We're going to talk about the lobby. We're going to talk about America. We're going to talk about the Trump administration, what's happening now on the right side of the map in the United States, alongside other subjects. And we're also going to talk about the assassination of Charlie Kirk and who's exactly behind it. Stu, welcome to the show.
Well, if we're going to talk about all that, I'm going to loosen up my tie a little bit because we're going to be together for some time here. But yeah, you're right. Actually, just recently, CNN dropped a report which names me the world's #1 anti-Semite on the internet. It makes me the most dangerous individual. NBC News, of course, did a big propaganda piece on me, labeling me this dangerous individual. And so they removed me from all of the Meta platforms. I'm not allowed to exist on a lot of these platforms. And if you're in an algorithm, which everybody is, you're just not allowed to see our content, which is why you just recently came across, our content. And as a Palestinian who was born in the occupied Palestine state, to just have recently heard of some of the things that we've been talking about now, ongoing, I think 3 years, that just is kind of like proof in the pudding. It just shows you that there is a control structure. There's a noose around the neck of the exchange of free information and open discourse that you're just not allowed to have. So I'm glad that we found each other, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. For those of you who are new to this conversation, of course, I had a quick chat with Stu before we started the recording, and I did find it fascinating. The man talks about substantial information, fact-driven data about the AIPAC lobby, the level of interference of the AIPAC lobby inside of the United States, how much the federal government, to a very large extent, is controlled by all of this. And what actually I found slightly different about you, Stu, alongside several other voices similar to yours in the United States, and I think we can start ahead with that, is you don't really give Donald Trump any excuses, do you? You're not a person who covers up for Donald Trump and the level of affiliation he has with the Israeli lobby. Can you clarify and go through with us slightly on that subject?
Yeah, because he's the president of the United States. He's not the prime minister of Israel. He is supposed to be the leader of our country, which is America. He is supposed to represent Americans and the best interests of Americans. And in fact, he has weaponized his entire administration against Americans and against America. It's the most anti-American administration of my lifetime, certainly. And as you look back historically, I think since JFK was assassinated, much like Charlie Kirk was, which I understand that you want to talk about that, I think that it's been the most anti-American administration since JFK. So no, the leader of the free world, the guy who purports to be the president of the United States, the commander-in-chief of our military, he doesn't get the luxury of escaping accountability. As a matter of fact, I think that you would be derelict in your duties as an American if you're not holding these people accountable. They are servants of the public, but with Trump, there's been this kind of atmosphere of idolatry that goes along with Trump. Trumpism is kind of a cult. And, technically speaking, could be identified as a cult when people are willing to overlook some of the most heinous, most disgusting betrayals and broken promises and, reneging on positions and critical campaign issues that he has completely forgotten about, maybe intentionally, maybe not, maybe he has a gun to his head. To me, it doesn't matter. You are the president of the United States. The buck stops with you. And it started my accountability with him during Operation Warp Speed. And I actually got phone calls from people that were close to Trump. And I was promised, proximity to Trump's orbit, and that I would be invited to Mar-a-Lago, that I could report from the White House, that I could be deeply connected to the administration. And this is, by the way, at the time where the height of Donald Trump and being close to him was like, it was like a fantasy for so many people that were in my position. They would do anything to have that access. And for me, it was like I was being asked to go easy on Trump. Hey, would you just back off on the shots just a little bit? No, I won't. I won't capitulate. I will not negotiate. My kids are under attack. My country's under attack. My people are under attack. My faith, my religion, my spirituality, my convictions, my principles, my morals, my values, they're all under attack. And we are watching people literally die and drop dead at the peak of their physical condition and are being subjected to next level psychological programming and brainwashing and indoctrination, gaslighting, and the hubris and the arrogance and the lockdowns and the masking and the shots. I mean, no, I was just unwilling to capitulate. And as we move forward now into this 47th administration, and we look at some of the policies, both domestically and abroad, that Trump has enacted, some of his day one executive actions that he took to crack down on anti-Semitism, to stifle free speech. This is a guy who was supposed to be the victim, of the very people that have been attacking us. This is supposed to be the guy that was going to be the warrior that so many people believed was going to ride in on this white horse and save our country. And, he was so anti-censorship, and, he was the president of peace, and he was going to end all of these wars, and he was going to build a merit-based economy in our country rather than a DEI, affirmative action-based economy where people are rewarded for being black or brown or gay, and in fact, it's just been completely the opposite. So, no, I think Trump is anti-American. I think that Trump is responsible for the ethnic cleansing and genocide and mass murder of a lot of Americans by Operation Warp Speed, which he still touts today as one of his greatest accomplishments. And, when you watch the business associates and personal associates of Donald Trump, you could talk about Howard Lutnick, Larry Ellison, Larry Fink, Jeffrey Epstein, Paolo Zampoli. You could talk about Miriam and Sheldon Adelson, his slavery that $230 million they've paid collectively just from the Adelsons to make sure that this guy was installed. And when you start to realize these things and you start really looking at these things, it becomes very obvious what Trumpism is all about. And that is that they knew that it would be easy to prey on somebody who has a love for money. It would be easy to prey on somebody who has a lust for women, particularly younger women. And so when somebody's involved in the real estate business or ventures like President Trump has been involved with for a very long time, and you look at who holds his notes, when you combine all of these different factors together, it's easy to see that this guy was captured without any kind of resistance, because all of the notes that he holds on all of his properties are held by these private equity firms and, Jewish powers. If they were to raise his interest rates by just a couple of basis points, or even a quarter of a basis point, they could bankrupt all of his industries. God only knows what he's done on tape. Unthinkable acts, I would imagine, that he's very significantly implicated in the Epstein files. That's not a secret anymore because we've all been watching the 180 that he did on this. Jeffrey Epstein, who? Like, why are we asking about this guy still? And Trump has always been in the business of procuring young women. He did it for his pageants. Well, he did Erica Kirk, which I'm sure that we're going to get to. She won, Miss Arizona USA in a Trump pageant. She was introduced to Charlie Kirk by either Donald Trump himself or somebody in his orbit. And now, all of a sudden, this Howard Lutnick, who was neighbors with Jeffrey Epstein, is showing up behind Donald Trump. He's his right-hand man. He is the AIPAC handler. He is what I refer to as the little Jew man in the corner that basically keeps him in check. He's his handler. And this guy was next door neighbors to Jeffrey Epstein. So this guy has been captured financially. He's been captured via blackmail. He's been captured economically. And he's been captured spiritually, as I understand that he actually even converted to Judaism. And he sold his daughter off to Jared Kushner. This is a very compromised, very captured individual, which has led to the complete occupation, not just of our Congress and our Senate and our courts, but now of the White House and the Oval Office and his entire cabinet. Howard Lutnick is the guy that put all of the prospective Trump nominees in front of a panel that were delivering Israeli loyalty tests. And so when you were getting confirmed or being considered for confirmation to Trump's cabinet or administration, you had to swear your allegiance to this foreign nation state. And I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of being lied to. I don't want my country ruled over by a foreign nation. I don't want my people ruled over by a foreign people. And I don't I don't want my presidents and my elected representatives to be compromised by this type of blackmail or crimes of moral turpitude or bribery. I think it's disgusting. So Trump is the worst of the worst, actually. And that hurts because I'm a huge supporter of Donald Trump. You know, when 2015 rolled around and he came down that escalator, I was not unlike a whole lot of other people, millions of people, where I was like, wow, this is a breath of fresh air. This guy is breathing into the stratosphere, the things that we have all been thinking. You know, this is a system that's weaponized against us. This is a bureaucracy that has unleashed unrestricted warfare upon us. And the people on the news are not talking about the things that we're discussing at our dinner table. And I feel dispossessed of my country, and I feel disenfranchised as an American, and I feel like I've been screwed over and left for dead and forgotten at every turn. And I feel that my country is like, you know, at the brink of being completely conquered. And at the time, it was like, you know, it was the polarization of the two-party representative constitutional republic that Americans have been programmed to believe actually exists in this country. And so it was always really easy to blame the other side, to blame the radical left. And I identify as a Republican, a conservative, you know, the red guy and the Christian and, you know, the pro-America, pro-freedom, pro-individual liberty. You know, I was against wars until I wasn't, when I was cheering on the idea of bombing sand people so that Sharia law wouldn't be forced upon me and my children. And, you know, I fell victim to the same media programming and indoctrination and gaslighting and brainwashing that so many tens of other millions of Americans were. And so I was told that this was the human hand grenade that was going to be thrown into the political system, and that this entire thing was going to be blown up. And finally, somebody that understood what it was like to be a persecuted American who was being dispossessed of his country was going to be somebody that could be actually a viable candidate in this political apparatus in our country. And I supported it wholeheartedly. And when he came down that escalator and he was calling people names and he was saying funny things and he was calling out the news media for being the fake news, you know, I was a huge supporter. And then, you know, when he was elected, everybody celebrated. He was the guy that was the underdog that defeated all of the odds, that, you know, the system that was rigged and stacked against him. And, you know, he defeated Hillary Clinton, and finally she was going to get locked up and we were going to start seeing justice. And none of these promises were ever fulfilled. And the longer that you waited, the more it seemed like you were just being told to sit back and just trust the process and trust the plan. And the more I waited, the more agitated I became. And then when, you know, of course, COVID came around and the lockdowns ensued and Operation Warp Speed happened, and I started to see all these things happening, it didn't take long to figure out who he's beholden to, who the puppeteers are, who the paymasters are, and who has him captured. And so, you know, it's that control structure, or it's that, I guess, enslavement of our president, and, you know, by extension of all the American people, that I've really been fighting and kind of, you know, railing against for the last several years, which has, you know, it's become controversial for some reason. I don't know why that would be. It just seems odd to me that an American speaking on behalf of American freedom and prosperity and national security, and the dislike for pedophilia and pornography and degeneracy and perversion, you know, the disdain that I have for an economic system that's designed for middle-class Americans to utterly fail, while the top 1% collectively holds more wealth than the entire middle class combined. I just, you know, I don't know why it's controversial to want better for my country or for my people. Why it shouldn't be
well, part of it would be
participate in the political process and actually have a voice in a determining, you know, be a determining factor in the political future, societal future, spiritual future of our country that we're going to leave for our children. And I don't think that that should be controversial at all.
I believe that big part of it, because some of the things you mention are also mentioned by other people too, especially on the Republican side. But then when you come across Israel and AIPAC and the Israeli lobby and the Israeli control, you're viewed as somewhat of a threat. And they're literally having a war lately. For example, let's have a look at this over here. Ben Shapiro, he posted this. Let's have a look.
Ben's a big fan.
No to the groypers. No to cowards like Tucker Carlson, who normalize their trash. No to those who champion them. No to demoralization. No to bigotry and anti-meritocratic horse S. And no to anti-Americanism. No, and it wasn't just him. We've had multiple statements coming from Ted Cruz recently in the Republican Jewish Coalition Conference, alongside Lindsey Graham, banging on about the fact that, well, these are the chosen people and we need to follow them. We had Pastor John Hagee saying that Israel is above all of the people on the face of the earth, and that includes the United States. I think we know exactly what we're dealing with when we talk about this censorship and people having a problem with this approach, especially coming from the right wing inside of the United States, especially seeing as in Israel, actually, in the past several months, there have been several publications and several statements coming from senior officials in the Israeli government talking about how much they view the public opinion in the United States, especially with the Republican side, as a matter of national security threat, as in they're viewing this as a threat to their demise. And now you have people like Ted Cruz saying that, well, if both parties start to hate Israel, that means we're going down with them, as in the United States is going to be eliminated because of the people's hate of the state of Israel. Which brings us back slightly to one point that I wanted you to elaborate slightly on, and then we move on to the other topics. You mentioned that you were offered this place next to Donald Trump. Nick Fuentes spoke about a meeting with Donald Trump as well, several figures who are considered to be on the conservative side. But we, of course, haven't seen any of them later on. You mentioned one important thing that caught my attention, though, the handlers or somewhat of the receptionists who are next to them who try and suss you out before you go in. Can you elaborate who these people were exactly and what did they want from you exactly to come and be on the Trump camp and be that presenter that Donald Trump endorses and supports with his administration?
What do they want from me?
Yes.
Well,
who are they?
They want me to champion. Well, the first one was Mike Flynn, General Mike Flynn. I have no problems naming any of these people, obviously, because these people are the enemies to freedom and the enemies of, real journalism and truth. And, I don't know if they kind of felt like I could be, persuaded with the promise of political relevance or some sort of a notoriety, like a platform or fame or money. But they quickly realized that none of those things are things that trip my trigger. Like I don't care about money. I don't care about fame. What I care about is my country, and what I care about is my kids. And so I'm in the category of the unbuyable. And, that could be a dangerous place to be, of course, because if they can't buy you off, if they can't blackmail you, if they don't really have any real dirt on you, then the only thing that they can do is just eliminate you and kill you. So I've realized that that's a very real risk, especially when you look at things that were happening, recently, like on September 10th, when Charlie Kirk was, murdered in front of 3,000 people live and the rest of the world on video. So, I think that what they wanted from me was they wanted somebody who was going to champion the Trump agenda or this agenda that was, assigned to Donald Trump and presented to us as the Trump agenda. But you quickly realize that it's not, in fact, his agenda at all. It's the agenda of Israel. It's the agenda of, Jewish billionaires and big donors and people that have the money that somebody like Donald Trump really likes. Or they have, big aircraft or jets or, whatever it is, or they have him on tape having sex with kids, maybe. I don't know. But they're not going to catch me in any of these positions, and they're not going to lure me with money. So what they wanted from me, obviously, was an endorsement that all of these things, they knew that I have a giant platform. They knew that I'm a skeptic. They knew that I question everything. They knew that my audience understands that I question everything and that I dive for evidence and that I look for fact and that I look for objective information that cannot be disputed. And, that I always try to find the source of where the conflict or the death or the destruction or the suffering is coming from. And then I shine a big bright light on it. That's what we're commanded to do, right? We're commanded to be the light that shines into the darkness, that makes the cockroaches scatter so that you can judge man by his fruit. And Trump is no exception to that. They thought that I would consider it to be an exception because the general rule basically is that if you want to be relevant politically, that you need to be accepted into Trump's orbit or into his circle. Well, that's rapidly changed now. Obviously, you see MAGA has been incredibly fractured, almost beyond any kind of repair at all whatsoever. They're just lost in limbo. They don't know what to do. They've lost all hope. They've lost their connection to God. And they don't really have any discernment because they have distanced themselves from God. And we as a country have done the very same thing, which is why we're a nation that's under judgment. And, you mentioned some of these other people that, who could they be and what do they do? And like, none of that really is actually very relevant because Ted Cruz is the guy that actually will tell you that the reason why he ran for office was so that he could get elected and better serve Israel. So these people are telling you, we don't have to speculate. We don't have to wonder why they're doing it or who these people are. That's all irrelevant, and it's just a waste of time because they're telling you specifically what it is that they believe. Lindsey Graham, this guy stood before the entire nation and said that if we don't properly bow to this 1948 founded stolen piece of land that they now call Israel, which was purchased by the Rothschilds from the city of London and made a country in 1948 on May 14th. If you don't properly worship like it's a religious sacrament, these people that claim to be Jewish, that the entire country will fall and that we will all go dark and that God will exact judgment onto our people. These people tell you exactly what it is that they have been told to say, and they're all being paid to say these things. Now, we were making assumptions that they were being paid until, of course, we had access to the AIPAC tracker and we can see how much money these people are taking. Or when we recently discovered that a simple post on social media could earn you a quick 7,000 shekels. And now we see that the influence campaign is right out in the wide open where people are literally being paid to say things about Israel. And so when you look at Israel for what it actually is, not for the psyop that it's been presented to us as, there are two versions of Israel. There is the Israel that the modern day lukewarm Schofield Bible indoctrinated Christian that doesn't read his or her Bible, that doesn't really know, that they will believe that this is the Israel of the Bible and that they will believe that this is, biblical prophecy that we're all watching be fulfilled right now as greater Israel is accomplished. And they have been duped into this state of apathy and complacency because they don't do their own research, meaning they don't just read the word of God. And then there's the actual definition of Israel, which is that it's a construct and it's the front lines for the military-industrial complex. It's a set of borders that was intentionally just scribbled on the map where they could hide all of the degeneracy, where they could hide all of the weapons and, munitions manufacturers, private equity firms, where they could be above reproach and above criticism because you cannot criticize God's chosen people. And so the foot soldiers that were created by extension were 2.5 billion people on the planet that they identify as Christians. They would enforce the idea that you're not allowed to criticize or question the state of Israel. They would police their own. These people would never have to go and fight their own wars because we would go fight them for them because they are persecuted, because they are the perpetual victim, because they have been attacked since the very beginning of time. So the reality is completely erased from history. The fact that these people are responsible for death that just, completely far supersedes the 6 million number that they constantly throw around so that they can be the perpetual victims throughout history using the Holocaust as their linchpin for all of the actions that they do. These people are still taking reparations from Germans. They've collected billions and billions of dollars from German people, but no reparations have been collected by, the black community, for example, in our country, who were brought here as slaves, not by white people, but by Jewish people. The transatlantic slave trade was owned largely by Jews. All of these slave ships were owned by Jews. The idea of slavery is a Jewish construct. Slavery is the brainchild of Jewish people. And there's just a lot of things that people just refuse to actually look at, although be it it's right in the wide open. And so the fact is, what Israel actually is the front lines of the military-industrial complex and a safe haven for pedophiles and criminals. I mean, that's all it is. And it's stolen land, stolen from people who have rightfully called it their ancestral homeland for thousands of years, who allowed these Jewish people to actually exist there, who wanted peace with these Jewish people, who then turn around and, put Palestinians into an open-air concentration camp, a prison camp, where they keep them without water, they keep them without food, they're not allowed to fish on their own shores without being gunned down by some IDF patrol boat. And the only way that they can fish, which we just saw this recently, is when those patrol boats are distracted, like, by example, a humanitarian aid flotilla that's making its way there with necessary goods for survival. And, these people then get captured by these people and told that they're terrorists for trying to help a people who have been barraged with rockets, who have been starved to death, who have been, repeatedly raped, who have had their kids taken from them and sold off into sex slavery, or who have had their organs harvested from them. Christians go there and they get spit on. So I don't know, where these people come from, and I don't know why they believe somebody like Ted Cruz or Lindsey Graham when they tell you something that's completely BS. It's a total lie that's been manufactured about this country, where when you look at all of the wedge issues that have been placed in our country, if you discuss any issue in our country, it's been brought to you, the source of all of this conflict, misery, suffering, financially, economically, spiritually, in our institutions of learning, in our government, with our law enforcement apparatus, with our courts of justice. Anything that you look at in this country, in the United States, and you say, that's a bad thing, that's problematic, that's conflict that I don't want, that's unnecessary death, that's unnecessary bloodshed, that's spiritually immoral, it all comes from these same people, from this same fake nation state called Israel. And I don't know why that's so difficult for people to talk about. I don't know why that's a bridge too far, or, like it's crossing the Rubicon. It's really difficult to negotiate with these terrorists.
Well, they have manufactured through psychological warfare and consistent propaganda, and of course through religious manipulation as well, for decades.
That's right.
And now, rightfully so, you're saying about Ted Cruz, for example, or Lindsey Graham, and people not taking what they say very seriously, which is very true to a very large extent. Hence why they're focusing on the conservative organizations. Now, that's another revelation that was relatively new for me. I was digging into the conservative youth inside of the United States, because they're, of course, worried about the newer generations, the fact that they are liberated to a large extent from the previous chains that this lobby put their fathers and grandfathers in. And again, maybe not surprisingly, but the level of unbelievable money and influence and total control over who runs these organizations, who these people can talk to, what they can say, what kind of questions can they ask, who they can bring on, who can they not bring on. And this would be the last part that I wanted to finish off with you. The case, and we'll take it as an example of TPUSA in particular, being one of the largest conservative youth organizations inside of the United States. If you can clarify slightly more about that, and then we'll wrap up with your views on the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the role that Erica Kirk, according to what I heard from you as well previously, is playing now after his assassination.
Yeah, well, I mean, she's an actress. And not only is she an actress, but she is a reality romance television actress. And she's not a very good one. And she was procured, as I mentioned earlier, by Donald Trump for his, pageants. And she won Miss Arizona USA. and she was introduced to Charlie Kirk on, I guess, her pilgrimage to Israel. There was a job interview done. It was discussed, no, you're not going to be my employee, you're going to be my wife. It turned into a date. And I believe that, she was very intentionally put in Charlie Kirk's orbit as his handler. He felt that she was really in love and that this love was real, had a family with her. And I believe that Charlie Kirk all the while thought, that God was putting people around him, which he used TPUSA as an engine to drive, people toward the cross, to point people toward Jesus Christ. That was his thing. And when you talk about American politics, or when you talk about American spirituality, I think that right now the big white pill is that a lot of Zoomers, a lot of college-age kids are very plugged in politically. I think that they're very aware. I don't think that they're as apathetic and complacent as the boomer generations or the Gen Xers that came before them. I think that they're very activated, and spiritually, I think they're very charged. So a lot of what Charlie Kirk was doing were, basically mini revivals of sorts. A lot of people were being saved by Jesus Christ. A lot of people were coming to God. And, they were kind of putting the cross at the center of everything that they thought politically. And that's something that Charlie Kirk, was very good at doing. Well, when it started to become very apparent and obvious to Charlie Kirk, what has been obvious to me now for several years, which is that secular Judaism and the control and the power structure that's been implemented in our country have a lot to do with these Jewish people, Jewish powers, Jewish supremacy, Jewish overrepresentation in our government, in our military, in our media, in our entertainment industry, in all of the bureaucracies, the State Department, everywhere that you look, there is Jewish power. And he became very aware of that. Well, the problem is that the reason why TPUSA was what it was, if you notice, there's not a lot of people that, are 20-something years old that start $500 million companies and, become internationally famous. I mean, it just doesn't happen. They're propped up. They're funded. They're put in the right places. They're given access to the right people. They have, associations with the right broadcast networks and affiliations with academia that would allow for them to be at these college campuses and these universities speaking directly to these children. And those things were not the doing of Charlie Kirk. He had people around him that were responsible for brokering relationships with donors. He had people around him that were responsible for fulfilling their daily job activities, whether it be audio, video, or whether it be, the procurement of a venue so that they could have another Prove Me Wrong revival type event in person where they exchange ideas and participate in open and free discourse. And when Charlie started asking these questions out loud, if my personal experience is any indication of to what Charlie may have been going through, he was obviously asking these things in his own personal circles. Because before I said any of these things out loud, I started seeking the opinions of people that I trusted, people that I felt were going to give me honest answers. And I got like a vitriolic kind of visceral response from a lot of these people. Like, you're really going to talk about the Jewish people? You're really going to talk about Israel? Like, that's not the road that you really want to go down. And the more that I kept learning about it, the more I started looking at these people kind of sideways and thinking to myself, like, but what do you mean? I mean, these problems are of a serious detriment to my country and to my people. Why wouldn't I talk about an attack on the USS Liberty that was perpetuated by the Israelis? Why would I not say that? Why would I read 86,000 pages of the unredacted JFK files and not say what it says in the JFK files about who was responsible for murdering America's president in front of his citizens? Why would I hold my tongue on any of this? Well, because anti-Semitism is the one thing that'll get you kicked off the internet. And I really knew nothing about it. I was never fixated on this issue. In the churches that I was at growing up and in my adult life, I was really never introduced to this. It wasn't like heavily being preached from the pulpit like it is today. I mean, these pastors are just insane. That's a whole nother thing that we could talk about at a later time, but it's a big problem and it's very dangerous. And I think that these are the people that were very carefully placed around Charlie Kirk from a very young age. These were the people that were connected to Donald Trump. Charlie Kirk's dad worked on Trump Tower as an architect. Trump obviously knows a lot of Jewish, very wealthy people. They have contributed to his campaigns. TPUSA was directly connected to kind of Trumpism and Trump world, and, was broadcasting at a lot of the same venues and events. And it was kind of like Charlie Kirk was directly aligned with the whole idea of a Trump America, or, making America great again. And he was the quintessential kind of young and engaged college dropout, conservative, disenfranchised guy that put the cross at the center of everything that he did. And so as these people were placed around him, and as he started asking these questions internally, I would assume that he probably got some of the same response. Well, when he started asking these questions out loud, especially in the weeks leading up to his assassination, he was then saying things to people that were close to him about his fear that these people may hurt or kill him. And he was communicating these things in text, not my words. I'm not making it up. This is what Charlie Kirk said. And now we've seen other verified and vetted, confirmed to be authentic text messages that came from Charlie Kirk that were talking about being forced to leave the pro-Israel cause. He saw, and what he said that he saw, was a multifaceted occupation of America and of our country. He saw secular Judaism and secular Jews as being a problem in America, and that were responsible for a lot of the issues that we debate on a daily basis, whether it be transgenderism or race issues or education or finance, the economic system, the Federal Reserve, the White House, Congress, whether or not they read the bills, why we're assisting with foreign aid and, weapons manufacturing to the extent that we are. Our borders are wide open. Israel's borders are fortified. Our military is not protecting our southern or northern borders. They're protecting all of Israel's borders. And he started to say these things. Well, the problem became very apparent, I believe, and all of the evidence points to the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu's regime saw this as a tremendous and legitimate threat to the brainwashing, propagandizing that you were just mentioning that has taken place over decades upon decades. And it was a bigger threat than somebody like me, because Charlie Kirk was doing all of this in person. Charlie Kirk was able to open the minds of people who previously were not spiritually engaged that now were. He was able to have open conversation that made people feel that they were a part of things. And because of that, he was on these campuses with the people that represent the future of the political class in our country. These would be the people that would be aspiring to be a part of academia, or a part of one of these institutions or these bureaucracies, a part of our government, a part of, the CIA, or, they wanted to say these people want to be a part of action and activism that puts our country back on a path toward true freedom and individual liberty and prosperity. And we want to see our shopping malls reopening rather than being foreclosed on. We want to see our banks thriving. We want to see interest rates dropping. We don't want to pay usurious debt. We don't want our kids saddled with it from the moment that they're born. And so when Benjamin Netanyahu saw Charlie Kirk start saying these things out loud, despite the fact that he was publicly dissuaded from doing so, probably, very likely, privately dissuaded from doing so, maybe even threatened, and then started saying, I don't want these people dictating who I'm allowed to invite to my events. I don't want to deal with these Jewish donors anymore. Well, at some point, Netanyahu thought, maybe we can grease the wheels here. And it's reported that Benjamin Netanyahu came to Charlie Kirk with the offer of $150 million in funding directly from his regime. That's kind of concerning, I would think. I would think that anybody who's looking at this would say, what would the Prime Minister of Israel have to do with TPUSA, Turning Point, an American activism journalism platform? Why would it concern Benjamin Netanyahu? Why would it benefit? What is the upside for this guy doubling the annual budget of TPUSA, which was operating at the time on a budget of $140 million annually? And he's offering $150 million personally to Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk rejected that. He wanted nothing to do with that. He didn't want to go on the Benjamin Netanyahu offered propaganda trips to Auschwitz, where they roll out big truck and trailers full of the big screens and show recreations by the Soviets about the plight of the Jewish people in this so-called death camp. He didn't want to go to the Wailing Wall, which is ruins from a Roman fortress, to go and bow to it or touch it or hump it or kiss it or lick it or act somber and cry at it or stick notes in it. He didn't want to be a part of that. And he rejected that as well. That was an indication that Charlie Kirk was a man of conviction. And, our FBI lies to us and said that he had a neck or a frame of steel. It turns out he had balls of steel, because if there's any authenticity at all to the letter that he supposedly wrote to Benjamin Netanyahu, he's telling him in this letter the reason why Americans don't want to support Israel any longer. Israel is the reason. The lies that have been told by the Israeli regime are the reason why hundreds of thousands of Americans, young American men, have lost their lives in these forever wars, leading all the way back to the great lie of weapons of mass destruction. And when we invaded Iraq, and when we executed Saddam Hussein on an international stage, not because of his ties to Al-Qaeda, not because of incubator babies, but because he wanted his own form of monetary exchange outside of the Rothschild criminal central banking cabal. He didn't want high interest promissory notes to some Jewish oligarch or some central bank that would be propped up in his country after they changed regimes there, just like they did with Muammar Gaddafi, just like they did with Bashar al-Assad, just like they would love to do in Russia. They would love nothing more than regime change in Russia, to take Vladimir Putin out of there, to break Russia up into a bunch of different little fake countries like Ukraine in 91 or Israel in 48, put some Jewish oligarch in control, prop up a central bank there, and install a usurious system of control that enslaves people that will be beholden. That's why we call them puppet governments, because they will be beholden to, those that are at the top of all of this. And they had to get rid of Charlie Kirk for that reason. If he was allowed to ask these questions in person and out loud to the spiritually engaged, politically charged, college-age future of our country, politically speaking, spiritually speaking, economically speaking, that would be big problems for the architects of this greater Israel Noahidus takeover that the Talmudists wish to exact, because they believe that they were chosen by God to do so, to be the arbiters of life and death and to rule over all of humanity, and to subjugate and infiltrate and occupy and target for destruction anything that gets in their way, which they have proven over the decades they are willing to do. They're willing to kill unnecessarily tens, hundreds of thousands, collectively millions and millions of innocent people. They're willing to kill their own people, as we saw during the stand-down order on October 7th. They're willing to agree to mutual self-destruction. We've heard about the Samson option. They will literally destroy themselves, our earth, and everybody in it before they will allow themselves to be defeated or exposed for the crimes that they're committing against humanity. So they had to get rid of Charlie Kirk. Erica Kirk's role in all of this, she was very obviously his handler. She was procured by Trump, introduced to her by Trump or somebody else inside of Trump's orbit. And now, obviously in the aftermath of all of this, you can see that this is not a grief-stricken widow, but that this is the new face of TPUSA. This is the fundraising beast that never stops, the machine that always continues. And that this is an actress who's doing a horrible job of playing the role of a grieving widow, who has talked about how excited she is. She's talked about how great, all of this is. She's gripping the arms of other men and rubbing her hands on the back of the head of J.D. Vance, who strangely picked up the body of Charlie Kirk within hours before it was even cold, likely. Unprecedented. That never happens after no autopsy. When she requested no autopsy happen, she's part of the cover-up. She's part of either the aforethought or the planning process or the day of activities or the after event, sets of occurrences that have to be done in order to make sure that everybody believes that Charlie Kirk was killed by a lazy-eyed sniper called Tyler Robinson who loved having sex with furries. And it's just not realistic. A guy who used his grandfather's 30-06 and, made that shot, got away from everybody, went completely undetected before then changing his mind and turning himself in, only then to recant all of this. None of the video adds up, and they just don't care. They're operating with hubris and they're operating with arrogance because they know that there will never be accountability in the absence of real action. Charlie Kirk may have been mobilizing a group of very charged young activists who would be willing to take necessary action that could lead to a threatening demise of that power structure that these people feel they were chosen by God to enact.
Dystopian reality, especially with the fact that they can get away with this in America and be protected by the federal government.
Yeah.
We'll wrap it up here. Stu, lots of stuff. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you so much for sharing all of this information with us. In the meantime, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this show. Take care, and we will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone. Salam.